Welcome, everyone, to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion. This is where we get to reflect, refine, and reboot your one precious life. In this space, we take a deeper look at what's holding you back. Maybe you want to show up differently for the people in your life. Maybe you're struggling with your emotional well-being. Maybe you feel as though something's missing and you want to get excited about your future. There's some good news. You can shift your perspective and begin to walk through the world in new, refreshing ways. I am a certified life and well-being coach who was called to create this show as a means to facilitate a journey of personal development. You have the power to change. Your life is precious. Don't waste another minute feeling unfulfilled. Champion Your Life starts now. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion. It's great to be here with you all again, working towards living our best lives together. We only had one precious life, so I love that you're tuning in and taking your emotional health and well-being seriously. Whether you're listening to me live right now or later on the 90 different locations that people tune in from around the globe, I just want to say welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to be discussing boundaries. Yes, this is a fascinating, often misunderstood topic, but I really look forward to opening up this dialogue today and hopefully being able to answer any questions you have with your chat box comments, because, you know, that's where we all learn in real time together. But seriously, many clients will come to me with questions about boundaries and how they can set them and enforce them effectively with the people in their lives. And what I've noticed almost all of the time is that people are completely misunderstanding what a boundary actually is and how to best put them in place. I love this definition on boundaries. It says a boundary is a limit or space between you and the other person, a clear place where you begin and the other person ends. And the purpose of setting a healthy boundary is to protect and take good care of you. A healthy boundary is self-care. And you may not have thought of it this way before, but setting boundaries is an important part of establishing one's identity and is a crucial aspect of our mental health and well-being. That's because in our work environment and in our personal relationships, when we don't set boundaries, it leads to resentment, anger, and burnout. Boundaries can also be mistaken as a way to control other people, but that's not really the function of a healthy boundary at all. People are usually under the assumption that boundaries means that the other person has to change, not yourself. But often, both are true. A boundary is a request that you make of someone to change a certain behavior. And if they do not change that behavior, there will be a consequence of what you will do to self-protect if they do not honor the boundary you set. And it's interesting to think boundaries impact all areas of our lives, don't they? For example, physical boundaries help us determine who may touch us and under what circumstances. Mental boundaries give us the freedom to have our own thoughts and opinions. And emotional boundaries help us to deal with our own emotions and disengage from the harmful, sometimes manipulative emotions of others. So again, we use boundaries to make clear what we will stand for in our lives. They help us clarify what is acceptable for us and what is not. However, boundaries are never a threat. This is often where people misinterpret the whole concept of boundaries. Think about it. Healthy boundaries should promote self-responsibility and empowerment as they lead to closer relationships with others. And in contrast, when we have weak boundaries or even when we make threats, it promotes dysfunction and emotional childhood behavior, which of course we talked about a couple of weeks ago in our podcast. The boundaries you set in your life are meant to protect you emotionally. So you need to clearly communicate when a line has been crossed. Here's an example to think about. You may decide that you need to set a boundary with your boss, who, for whatever reason, is constantly yelling and berating you in meetings. And you might just get to that point where you need to say, with all due respect, if you continue to raise your voice at me, I'm going to have to leave the room until we can communicate calmly. I think this is a good example, as it allows your boss to choose how he or she will behave, but also clearly describes what you will do if the raising of the voice and the berating continues. You make the request, give them the option to do whatever they wish, and then the key is that you follow through on the boundary you set. And again, this is not an ultimatum. It's an act of self-care and protection for yourself. It's not a way of controlling another person. And unfortunately, that actually is what most people think a boundary is: trying to control others and giving them ultimatums. And more often than not, that always backfires. Then we have way on the other side of the spectrum, there are those that don't want to set proper boundaries because they don't want to risk losing relationships. They're afraid that if they take care of themselves and speak their truth, they might make the other person angry. And often these people will stay in relationships or jobs that are stressful and filled with resentment because they're afraid to speak their truth. So setting boundaries is really some hard work, but it's the work of true intimacy. People who cannot find the courage to have these kinds of conversations will often stay in relationships and work environments where they are pretending, right? And then wonder why the situation blows up on them. These situations erupt because of built up resentment and anger. And ironically, we end up blaming the other person for our lack of courage in setting our own healthy boundaries. It's imperative that we love and honor ourselves enough to tell the people in our lives the truth and to set proper boundaries. This isn't just for us, it's for the sake of the person doing the violating too. Sometimes people are just unaware of how you're feeling, or sometimes they're just pretending, right? But conversely, we must understand that others do not have to understand or agree with our boundary. And you should also be prepared for that as well. But when you set the boundary out of love for yourself and for the other person, you can tell them the truth without frustration, anger, or threats. Now, I can't honestly say that when I've tried to set an important boundary in my past, that I've always come from a loving place. Typically, I've had it, I'm done, and it's come off less than kind. But what I've learned in my studies, that if you're feeling those kinds of emotions and a boundary needs to be set pronto, you first need to clean up your own thinking before you set the boundary. We need to be coming from a place of calm and love before we set proper boundaries. I mean, man, that's pure emotional adulthood when we can do that. You know, when we try and smile and act like everything's fine, but in reality, you're seething inside, This is when you need to step back, take a breath, evaluate the situation before deciding your wisest course. And here's another thing too. Often people who are attempting to set a boundary worry very much. They worry how they're being viewed, as a bad person, the rude one, the one that's always causing all the unnecessary problems. But the true irony is that when we don't set a boundary, we do act rude and uncaring because we're ticked off, right? We've had enough. I heard a great quote from my friend in London, and she said she had read it somewhere. It says, when emotions are high, intelligence is low. Oh, I'm going to say it again because it's so good. When emotions are high, intelligence is low. Is that not the truth? So what do? We need to slow down in those moments. We need to breathe, right? We need to access our awareness. For me, honestly, I always need to pray. I'm like, Lord, help me here. And he usually tells me to wait until I can communicate more thoughtfully. I'm learning less is best until I can recalibrate and communicate calmly. And then what happens in the end is that you can move forward from a place of true authenticity, communicating, right, from the right heart space without anger and resentment. It's so interesting that when you tell someone the truth about yourself, you open the space for more honesty and truth within the relationship. Here's one more thing. How you explain what you need when you set a boundary is almost as important as the boundary itself, because it's just never effective when we're not coming from a place of love. I promise, tried it, doesn't work. Choosing to set clear boundaries can change everything. What can happen is that a new and actually healthier relationship can eventually blossom. And it's based on honesty and trust and respect, right? Established boundaries lead to more love, connection, and intimacy. And don't we all want more of that? Ooh, I love this. I see some comments coming in the chat box. I'm just going to read one before we go to break, okay? I try to set boundaries in my life, but somehow I always end up feeling guilty when I do, and then I give up. I tried recently to set up a meeting with a person to discuss a boundary issue, but then I got intimidated. The whole thing went badly. Yes. Oh boy. I understand. I feel you. Feeling guilty can really distort the reality of anything we're up against. Sometimes it's like I was saying early, we feel like we're doing something bad or mean, right? When we set up a boundary. But it is interesting how it feels like some people will have almost a strategy to get you upset and intimidated, kind of like a toddler infuriates his parent, and then before you know it, they're running the show. I think the same goes for people that can, arouse their emotions until you feel like they're in control of you. Sometimes it can feel manipulative, but what I want to say, the smartest thing you can do is just stay in charge of the only person that you can control, which is you, right? Prepare ahead of time what you might want to say, and do your best not to get, hooked into saying something you're going to regret. If you find yourself getting worked up, just take a time out or a breath before you say anything. Nothing wrong with saying, I just need a moment, right, to gather my thoughts. One of my very, very favorite proverbs that I think I've committed to memory, if it's going to come to me, it's a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So stay in control and just stick to your agenda. We're getting ready to go to our first break. I'd love to hear from you all. Boundaries is just one of those topics people really need, but are a little hesitant to explore. comes with some discomfort, but that's okay. Discomfort's our friend. You are listening to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion, and we will be right back. We are talking all about boundaries, but our experience in life is partially dictated by how we allow ourselves to be treated, right? Boundaries are the rules you set for other people and sometimes for yourself, so that your interactions with those in your life are the best that they can be. I read an article by Dr. Henry Cloud about a couple, Jennifer and Steve, and how they shared a boundary issue around chronic lateness and how that was affecting their relationship. And it's just this brilliant example that I'd like to share with you, because I think you will be able to see the wisdom in this one very quickly. So he writes, Jennifer was weary of Steve's chronic lateness when they would try to get together. Because he owned his own business, he was often delayed. It seems like such a little thing, but as time passed, Steve's tardiness became a big problem. Jennifer would arrange her day to meet for dinner, and she wanted Steve to show up on time. Reminding, nagging, cajoling. Steve hadn't been, it wasn't effective. Steve would either defend himself by saying, you don't appreciate the work I do, or he would simply deny the problem altogether by saying, it doesn't happen that often, you're overreacting. So Jennifer ran out of strategies. And finally, after thinking through the problem, Jennifer came up with a 2-point plan. One night she sent Steve a text that said, hey, babe, I want to apologize to you for my bad attitude about our dates. And Steve was stunned. He was eager to hear her apology. I've been nagging you whenever you're late, Jennifer continued, and no wonder you're late. I mean, who would want to put up with that? You're right. I really don't look forward to your resentment, Steve responded, and I'm sure it makes me avoid you. The other day I was going to be 10 minutes late, but when I thought about facing your wrath, I figured I might as well make it 30 minutes, since I knew you'd be angry anyway. So I ran a few errands before meeting up with you. Jennifer was peeved, but refrained from reacting and said, I'm going to try to be less angry and more caring and approachable, even when you're late. I might not always do it well, and I'll need your help here, but I really don't want to act like that. But also, it's just not my attitude that I'm going to be changing. My actions are going to change too, because I enjoy spending time with you and I want to show up on time for our dates. But if you can't get there on time, I'm going to go ahead and order my food and eat. If you're here, you're here. If not, you'll just miss out. Well, Steve didn't like that last part. Jennifer, you know I want you to wait on me. I want us to eat together. I know you do, but it won't happen until you can arrange things to get here on time. So interesting, because Steve no longer heard nagging or an ultimatum. He only heard Jennifer's apology. So for the next few dates, Steve structured the end of his day to meet Jennifer on time. Their dates were much more enjoyable. So what happened here? Jennifer solved a small but chronic problem by making an important shift in her attitude. She stopped trying to change Steve, and she started to make changes in herself. Jennifer moved from seeing the problem as Steve's lateness to seeing it as her unhappiness with Steve's lateness. Now, this was hard at first, but when she did that, it opened the door to the things that she could control. When you cease to blame someone else and own the problem as yours, you are then empowered to make changes to solve your problem. So to do this, Jennifer set a couple of limits on herself. First, she reined in her impulse to attack Steve for his tardiness. This was not easy, as she was clearly right. He was clearly wrong. She would have been justified, right, in confronting him at every infraction, but it wasn't helping, was it? So she placed a boundary on her anger, since it wasn't solving the problem. Isn't that a fascinating concept to consider? That we can put a boundary on our emotions when they don't serve us. Secondly, Jennifer set a limit on her enabling of Steve. She realized that she was making it too easy for him to be irresponsible. So she said no to her tolerating his tardiness. She decided to go ahead and eat if he wasn't there. These two changes made a difference, right? A big difference for both people. You cannot make someone grow up, but you can make it easier for them to experience the love and limits they might need. When they face the consequences of their actions, they stand a better chance of changing than if they face nagging and hounding. Bottom line, we need to become truthful and authentic, but not controlling. For fun. I see some things in the chat box. I had a feeling that this topic might speak to you all. Keep sending comments in, because this is when, of course, we learn in real time together. This is good. I have a daughter-in-law who will love this. I'm pregnant, and if one more person comes up to me and touches my belly, it won't just be boundaries they'll have to worry about. Yes, I remember that feeling. Quit touching my stomach. What else? Okay, here we go. How do I deal with friends who always want to talk politics right now? It always seems to end badly for me. I really don't know how to set a boundary around this. Any advice? Very topical these days. And I hear a lot about this from friends, clients, family. I believe it's okay to steer clear from controversial topics these days. It's a little bit like the Wild West out there. But often when people have really strong opinions, I'll listen to what they have to say, but then I just decide to take a wise pass on my response and my reaction. I'll just gently try to transition into a different conversation by saying, yeah, that's interesting, but you know what? I really want to hear about you and how you've been. Now, look, if that approach fails, they push it. You might have to introduce the boundary. Like you might want to say something like, for my own sanity, I just need to stop talking about this. That way you put it on yourself, right? It has just been divisive these days. Tell me about blank. And then, bring up any other topic or question that is likely to cause less tension. Yep, it might be awkward for a minute or two as a conversation finds its groove again, but you will most likely get back on track. I find that our relationships require an extra dose of love and grace right now. Let's see what else you got here. My husband and I had our first child, and I find myself getting an overload of comments and suggestions for perfect parenting. These are coming from parents, in-laws, anyone who can speak. I am having trouble setting boundaries. Should I just let their comments go? Sometimes I find myself seething, as you mentioned earlier. Well, first of all, no parenting experience is perfect, so you can let that one go. Parenting perfection, sounds like an unattainable illusion. It is funny how everyone loves to give their best advice in raising children. You're certainly not alone in setting this boundary. But you know what? Here's the thing. You can always listen, but it's always going to be your decision, right? Your call. Maybe if you can look at it that way, your boundary has already been set, right? You're going to do what you and your husband think best. You can always be kind and listen to all the advice, but your priority and decisions will come from your unique family unit. That's a great question. I bet there's so many people that can relate in some form to that boundary. We're getting so close to the end of the show, and this is the kind of topic that can just go on and on and on. I hope that you will. If you're struggling with a boundary, please reach out to me on my website. Just send me a comment and I will get back to you, I promise. You know, boundaries are what happen when you truly know yourself, your needs and wants, and then you learn to access your voice to speak to those things. We all have limits and we all experience testing, right, of our limits. And most of the time, people are not really trying to violate your limits. They often aren't even aware of what they are. Sometimes this is because we are not clear with ourselves or other people about what we need and want. But the more we set boundaries, the more we recognize them. They're not so scary. You know what I mean? And setting boundaries, we help people to show up for us. And we also become better at showing up for them. This is the work we must learn to do. I mean it, reach out if you need some help setting healthy boundaries. In the wise words of Brene Brown, clear is kind. You've been listening to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion. For more information, please check out my website at Leighanne Champion Coaching, or just type in championyourlife.com. Next time, we're going to be talking about buffering. It's all those things that we overdo when we're coping with life. I can't wait. I will see you soon. And until then, Godspeed. Thank you for listening to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion, on transformationtalkradio.com. To find out more about me and my coaching platform, visit championyourlife.com. That's championyourlife.com. You have one precious life. Let's live it to your fullest potential. Let's go. Let's do this together. See you next time.